Right, thanks very much. I've been told... I must say, you know, the music they've had this morning, I think it's an alternative to waterboarding, you know. I think I would have told any secret I knew just to get it to stop. Anyway, there you go. I'm sure it's well-intentioned. What can I say? Well, you know, sure is, in the immortal words of George W. Bush, sure is good to see such a dense crowd here today. I miss him, you know. We, after-dinner windbags, or freelance rhetoricians, as we prefer to call ourselves, used to have a great time with George W. Bush. You know, Barack Obama's not quite so funny in the way that George W. Bush was. I mean, like when Condoleezza Rice went in to see George W. and said, the UN wants some money to solve the problems of malaria. And Bush said, maybe them Malarians deserve it. And she came in and she said, I'm going to see the president of Palestine. Have you a message for him? And George W. said, you just tell Mr. Abbas, I just loved Mamma Mia. And the health secretary came in and said, Mr. President, chlamydia's going up. He said, it's a great stock. I knew I should get some. But anyway, enough of that. We settled you down. It was, I noted the reference from our chair about the British Museum being suitable for some of the speakers, and I appreciate it. I'm probably one of them. In fact, it was quite daunting when one thinks of oneself as a frightfully current person that they said, well, you better say a bit about, you know, yourself, because most people won't ever have heard of you. You know, they're young. So suffice it to say that I had 18 years as a member of Parliament, 11 years in government, including 4 stints as Minister for Broadcasting, which I suppose is the reason why I am able to say happy birthday, RAB. But perhaps 1992, though it's significantly RAB, the really significant time, I suppose, was 1990 in the Broadcasting Act 1990, which I took through Parliament. And then I suppose it was a form of corruption, except one wasn't aware of it. That by allowing Classic FM to be created, I created a job for myself. I'm amazed not to have been hauled over the coals for that. But just to go back to those times, I think it's very difficult to guess the future, isn't it? And politicians are probably worse at it than most other professions. But I think if you look at the 1990 Act, it didn't do that bad a job. I mean, first of all, it anticipated the need for 1,000 flowers to grow in the broadcasting environment by going for light touch regulation. Again, something I suppose one should now hang one's head in shame. We did make it easy for Sky to be established in the UK, because the alternative was it would have gone to Luxembourg. And, you know, whatever reservations one may have, and I have plenty about the Murdochs, I do think Sky is a good addition to the broadcasting environment, not least because it stopped us all being badgered about the cost of the licence fee, because, of course, the licence fee looks quite reasonable compared to what they charge for the full bouquet on Sky. The one thing we definitely got wrong was anticipating the continuation of a regional base for ITV. But then it would have been impossible to change it, because members of Parliament, you know, they were always lushed up by their local ITV companies. These sort of people were given interviews on regional news stations that they would certainly never have got on a national setup. So it was not going to be possible to change it. But that has obviously went by the board very quickly, because although politicians often play King Canute and they think that they can you know, defy the waves, you can't defy the waves. But the one thing where I think we manifestly got it absolutely right was in radio, in trying to encourage commercial radio and in trying to give commercial radio the opportunity to grow and become a serious rival to the otherwise all-powerful BBC. And I think the creation of national commercial radio networks was the right thing to do, controversial in some quarters at the time, and I think it's been a success, don't you? I think it has actually given a top to the regional base of commercial radio. And the other, of course, big decision relevant to Classic FM was that the bill, as originally drafted, bearing the influence of Nigel Lawson, who thought you didn't need to have any quality control on anything in broadcasting. I don't satirise it, it's a point of view. Just not one I shared, that you know, you didn't have to sort of pre-qualify as being fit and proper to do these jobs before you were handed rare franchises. And the national radio networks were going to be whoever was the highest bidder they'd be awarded to. But we then later on put in a clause that said that there had to be choice and variety. which came about because on the better-run parliamentary committees, you don't have guillotines and you don't have an intolerance of someone else's point of view. I never had to guillotine a bill in all the 11 years I was a minister. I was probably fonder of some of the Labour front benches than I was of some of my own colleagues. Gerald Corfin, the late Robin Corbett, who was very good on broadcasting, came to me and said, shouldn't we really do something about the national radio networks to ensure there was variety? And we particularly did have in mind the creation of a classical music network as an alternative to the obviously commercially much more viable range of popular stations, and we did change it. And I think most people liked it, except for Richard Branson. I must tell you that those were the days, I mean, I know how people remember this, when mobile telephones, you needed a bodybuilder's course to carry them because you had this sort of charging pack. And I was sitting in my car recovering from carrying this thing to the car. And I got a call, and nobody knew, I mean, it's just, this was a different world. And it's Richard Branson, and he started to berate me for having changed these rules. And it wasn't the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I told him that I didn't take kindly to him coming on, and maybe I should have done the Murdoch, what politicians with Murdoch, and grovelled, but I decided this was not the moment for a grovel, so I did not grovel. And I'm not ashamed that I failed to grovel, because I think Classic FM, I would say this, wouldn't I, has been a good addition to the broadcasting arrangements in this country. Since departing politics, or even in fact while one was in politics, I've had the opportunity of presenting more than 2,000 radio programmes on the BBC first of all, and then on commercial networks. 606 on the BBC. Sorry your husband got the rough edge of my tongue, but it was supposed to be a controversial show, and most of us think the FA is complete crap, and I'm sorry that that remains my passionate conviction. But anyway, so we did 7.5 years on 606, which was very illustrative because David Hatch, who was those again the Jurassic Park inhabitants like me will remember him very well. He said something which is actually very wise. I commend it to you as a proposition about life. When I got to do 606, a controversial decision really, he said, enjoy it, but just remember 1,000 people could do it just as well. And in fact, that's probably true of so much of what we all try to do in life. It's all a matter of luck. And Radio 3. I quite enjoy Radio 3. My only worry about Radio 3 used to be the worry I always had about Radio 4, which they've got out of, which is becoming prisoners of their listeners. And where you almost feel, there was a terrible organisation, I don't know if it still exists now, maybe there are members of it here, they'll lynch me afterwards, called The Voice of the Listener. And The Voice of the Listener, I once said when they were berating me, and Ray Snoddy, who's here, will well remember these days, that I as a minister was supposed to do something about declining standards on the BBC. And I asked what was the membership of The Voice of the Listener. It was 200. And yet the Voice of the Listener, their activities, was widely reported in the Daily Telegraph and such, as if it was some massive organisation. I think Radio 4 has rid itself of that. Radio 3 hasn't. And I did 7 years as a Radio 3 presenter, and it used to depress me when I used to travel quite long distances to do programmes based on celebrities within the world of classical music. Choosing to talk about other celebrities from the past. Even got Pavarotti on, who was a bit of a mate of mine, sorry, it's a terrible name drop, but he was, to talk about his favourite tenors. That involved travel to New York. The BBC almost collapsed at the thought of that. And you'd think Pavarotti, at the height of his fame, that would actually get a bit of coverage, but it did not. And one of the things I quite enjoy about being on commercial radio, whereas quite a number of my more superior friends think it's like sort of moving a bit down market, is that people actually listen and are interested to talk to you about it. People come up in the street and they talk about either Classic FM or, more likely, my gig with Ken Livingstone, with whom I'm going to move in, by the way. This is exclusive. You've got to tweet this. Ken and I are coming out, and we're going to be together. So just I want you all to be the first to know. We even got a Sonny nomination. Of course, we didn't win against the Leviathan of the BBC. I'm not against the BBC. I was a big supporter of the BBC when I was the broadcasting minister. The only thing I would say, though, it was horrific when you go to the Sonys and you look at all the list of assistant producers, deputy assistant producers, producers, assistant to the assistant deputy producer. And I've got to say that one of the good things about commercial radio, and why I love working with Global, everything is crammed in under one roof. And you do realize that a lot of enthusiastic people who are probably overworked and underpaid are actually doing what they do for the joy of doing it. And I think there is that liveliness about commercial radio that is good. And some excellent broadcasters too. I was going to mention later on Nick Ferrari, but someone like him, is a fantastic broadcaster and wouldn't be able to do what he does on commercial radio on the BBC because the formats just don't fit. Can I move on maybe then now to some more general observations? I think that radio has done surprisingly well, considering there are plenty of people who thought that the emergence of new media and so on would crush radio and that radio would seem to be yesterday's technology. I think the media groupings that has most suffered from new media is of course, the newspapers. And when one looks at what's happening with Lord Justice Leveson and all this excitement, part of the problem that the newspapers have been in for a number of years now is that they have to reach into excess in terms of their reporting because they are much more part of the entertainment industry these days than the news industry. Most people get their news either directly from online or through electronic broadcasting. I mean, that's always been the case as far as people's voting intentions are concerned. Contrary to it was the Sun what won it. It was the Sun what found a bandwagon to jump on. It was people make up their mind from different things. I think radio has been strikingly resilient. The only distressing thing is when you actually look at the advertising revenues and you see the inevitable dominance of television, but you also see, even bigger now, the amount of advertising revenue expended on the internet, and that has to be, to some degree, at the expense of commercial radio. And I regret that, because it seems to me if you're looking for reasons to say that radio is a good place to advertise on, it surely has to be that most people make a conscious decision to listen to the radio, and they therefore listen to the radio. You go into quite a lot of households and you find the television is on as a kind of moving picture. Indeed, there are, contemporary artists, and they actually do go into videos. You're supposed to have on your dining room wall something that moves about and sort of says stuff, although it's generally rather repetitive. And for a lot of people, television is just like that. It's not necessarily something that people focus on. And of course, I am one of the world's most expert manipulators of my Sky Plus. And so I contrive, when I'm hooked on Downton Abbey and exciting things like this, to tune in 20 minutes after it began, and you don't get a single ad by... and I'm sure an awful lot of people are doing that. The thing about radio is that most people make a conscious decision to listen to the radio, and therefore what the messages that come across from the radio in terms of advertisements, I would have thought that get an audience that is more likely to listen and take in what is being said. I personally do not resent, of course, the fact that we have to have advertising. There are some people who say, oh, shame your show is ruined by the adverts, or indeed, I'm sure there was one person came to me and said, shame your show ruins the adverts. But it's, which I took in good part, but there you are. But the point, nevertheless, is it's a bit like Benjamin Disraeli was once confronted by a cleric, a dean of a large cathedral, who was railing against dogma. And he said, dogma, Mr. Dean, no dogma, no dean. And so we have to understand that commercial radio depends on advertising. And indeed, quite a lot of effort obviously goes into creating entertaining adverts that we all understand the necessity for. I suppose if I had one plea, just as a sort of jobbing broadcaster, it would be to say that if it were possible, and I do understand there are resources restrictions here, if it was possible for the advertisements to better reflect some of the stations that they are on, sometimes, for instance, on Classic FM, the music and the adverts is very jarring to those who tune in for an altogether different experience. I do understand that one size fits all may be a necessity, but it is worth thinking about what will be the reaction to some of the sound that comes out of the advertisements for people who've made a particular choice in their listening. To sum up what I wanted to say, because I'm conscious that I was warned that men in white coats would come and drag me off if I outstayed my welcome. I believe that the radio industry is in good shape. I believe that the radio industry encourages a lot of creativity. It encourages a lot of people to get on young, which is good. I mean, I find it, although, as I say, very much committed to my cave in Jurassic Park, I find it very stimulating to be working with a lot of young, energetic people who plainly feel that the creativity of radio suits what they want to do and how they want to spend their life. And they certainly don't do it to make their fortunes, so they do it for love of what they do. I would, though, like to see it more accepted that radio is a good medium to communicate with listeners about commercial as well as other issues. I still think there is a room to take radio more seriously as an advertising medium. And I'm not just saying this because obviously this is a convenient place to say it, and probably it would not be expected for me to say anything any different. But I genuinely believe it. I think when you actually look at people's capability to absorb advertising messages, absorbing advertising messages on radio is probably as easy a place to do it as anywhere else, certainly on the electronic media. So I would like to wish RAB a happy 20th birthday. I'm glad to be still around to celebrate it, having, as you rightly say, had ministerial responsibility for broadcasting at that time. I shall get off now and hope that the rest of the morning is thoroughly entertaining. Thank you very much.